Kaliningrad is dangerous. The Russian exclave, which sits awkwardly between Poland and the Baltic states, has long been one of Russia's most prominent weapons when it comes to intimidating its enemies. That's become truer than ever since Russia invaded Ukraine. Only, it's not troops and missiles that make Kaliningrad so dangerous in 2025. It's hybrid warfare. The exclave has become a hub for Russia's hybrid assaults against other European countries. And now, Kaliningrad lies at the center of another controversy. Kaliningrad has reportedly just targeted Spain's defense minister mid-flight, placing tensions between NATO and Russia on the brink of exploding. On September 24, Euronews reported that the military jet carrying Spanish Defense Minister Margarita Robles was targeted with an interesting form of attack. Fortunately, Robles didn't have to worry about Russian anti-air fire or missiles being launched at her aircraft. Russia's approach was much sneakier than that. As the Spanish jet flew over the Russian exclave of Kaliningrad, it suffered a GPS disturbance of some description. That alone wouldn't guarantee that Kaliningrad was the source of the disturbance. Granted, the GPS problem occurring just as the Spanish jet was flying over Kaliningrad is suspicious enough. However, the real evidence that it was Russia's exclave targeting the jet comes from where the jet was headed. Robles was en route to the Siauliai air base in Lithuania, which is part of the very NATO air policing mission that's been created to stop Russia's aircraft from violating NATO member nations' airspace in and around the Baltic region. It also wasn't just Robles on board the flight. The A330 jet was also carrying several other people to whom Russia would have loved to give a scare with its GPS-based hybrid warfare tactics, including relatives of soldiers stationed at the Lithuanian airbase and journalists. The good news here is that Robles arrived at the Siauliai unhurt and unshaken. Spain's defense minister even held a press conference where she shot back at who she believed was behind the GPS attack. Under no circumstances will they break the will of Spain or any of the countries of the Atlantic Alliance to continue working for peace and coexisting in peace, Robles exclaimed. She also made clear that Russia's intimidation tactics wouldn't prevent her from exercising the right of all of us to travel and fly freely throughout European territory without interference from everyone knows who, as we experienced this morning. Even if Robles was more shaken than she appeared, she was never in any real danger from the Kaliningrad GPS attack. Euronews reports that the aircraft she was on received its signals from a military satellite rather than GPS. Presumably, that means the aircraft was capable of identifying an incoming GPS disruption, even though that disruption wasn't going to do anything to cause issues with the flight. Spain's defense ministry released a statement to that effect, with its spokesperson saying, "There's been an attempt to disrupt the GPS signal, but as our aircraft has an encrypted system, it was not affected. It must be common on this route and also with commercial flights. It's not because it's our aircraft." Still, that's not the issue here. The big problem is that this latest attack on a European minister's aircraft is just one of many, Euronews says. It claims that dozens of similar incidents have been recorded since Putin launched his Ukraine invasion, almost all of which are being traced back to Russia and many to Kaliningrad. Warnings are flowing in from Baltic and Nordic nations too, all of which have been warning of increased electronic interference of planes, ships and drones. Again, this interference is very often attributed to Russia. If all of this isn't enough indication that Kaliningrad was behind the GPS strike, another interesting nugget of information comes from Sky News and its report on the incident. It says that the other people on the flight weren't just relatives of random Spanish military personnel stationed in the Baltic region. They were related specifically to Spanish airmen who'd been sent to Lithuania as part of a new NATO air defense mission being created on the organization's eastern flank in response to Russia's repeated drone and fighter jet incursions into NATO airspace in September. Those airmen have already started to cause problems for Russia. They've helped to intercept 8 Russian aircraft flying over the Baltic Sea in the week before this GPS attack alone, suggesting that there may have been an element of revenge to just what occurred in the skies over Kaliningrad. Spain's Defense Ministry might be claiming that any commercial or military aircraft flying near this space would experience the same problem. And it's probably correct. However, it's still a mite coincidental that this particular plane carrying important people who oppose Russia was targeted. And here's where it gets more interesting. This story is remarkable because it offers an example of Russia directly targeting an important European and NATO-aligned minister. That alone, to many, would constitute an attack on NATO that warrants some form of response. However, this most recent example of GPS disturbance on a European minister's aircraft isn't the first time Russia has pulled something like this. Russia has done something similar before, and not all too long ago. On September 4, news broke that a plane carrying European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was targeted with a similar attempt at GPS jamming. That GPS attack was more successful than the one Kaliningrad used to target Robles. Sky News says that the pilot of von der Leyen's aircraft was forced to use paper maps to successfully land the aircraft, suggesting that Russia managed to achieve a total shutdown of the plane's GPS. Prior to that landing, the aircraft was forced to circle the Bulgarian airport, where it eventually touched down for about an hour, again highlighting the severity of the issue. We published a video covering this GPS attack in more detail, along with its aftermath. Check that video out if you want to learn more about what Russia is doing to target some of Europe's most prominent ministers. So, what did Russia intend to achieve here? Downing Robles' aircraft was never really on the agenda for Russia. It's clear by now that the GPS jamming Russia is using is coming from Kaliningrad. If an aircraft crashed because of that jamming, a war with NATO might be the result. Russia doesn't want that, at least not yet. The threat of these sorts of attacks is also mitigated by the fact that pilots are capable of flying without the aid of GPS. The pilot for von der Leyen's aircraft proved that by breaking out paper maps to guide their aircraft into landing safely following Russia's earlier September attack. Forbes confirms this capability in a 2017 article, where it asks the question of what happens if the GPS on a plane fails. Though GPS has become the gold standard of flight navigation since its introduction, the publication points out aircraft have been around a lot longer than GPS. That means the techniques that existed before GPS was invented still work today. Plus, the 2 radio navigation systems that are most widely installed on aircraft, which are Automatic Direction Finder or ADF and Very High Frequency Omnidirectional Range or VOR, have range limitations. An aircraft flying over the Pacific Ocean, for example, might fall out of one of these systems' ranges, meaning that flight without GPS still happens even in the modern day. Again, it's all about the paper maps on these occasions. However, the aircraft's GPS system would reactivate once the plane was within range of an airport, so this is more of an intermittent GPS issue. Still, the point is that pilots can fly without GPS. So, jamming alone isn't enough to cause a flight to crash. That isn't to say that GPS disturbances don't cause issues at all. Disregarding the inconvenience and slight feeling of panic that occur when a GPS goes down, other problems can occur. Spirant points this out in an article questioning whether the December 2024 crash of Azerbaijan Airlines Flight 8243 might have been caused by some sort of GPS interference. Even with a pilot knowing how to fly without GPS, such interference causes problems with the plane's Automatic Dependent Surveillance Broadcast or ADSB system. Aircraft use ADSB to report their positions automatically, and it's a GPS-based system, Spirant says. Both commercial and private planes use it to provide automatic updates related to their speed, identity, and position. The loss of those updates could lead to the indirect downing of a plane, as Spirant explains. Unless you could see the aircraft or listen to air traffic control, someone on the ground would not know that Flight 8243 was flying near Makhachkala. If ADSB had been working, the flight could have been recognized as a friend, i.e. a scheduled commercial flight rather than a military threat. In other words, GPS jamming can be used to prevent other aircraft from properly identifying the affected plane. In extreme cases, this could lead to the plane suffering an ADS-B failure to be confronted by other aircraft. In the worst cases, the affected plane could even be shot down. That was unlikely in the case of Robles' plane. European fighter jets weren't going to be sent to take her aircraft down, and Russia certainly wouldn't do it directly. The fact that the GPS disturbance didn't even work ensured that. Still, the small possibility is there, and it's another factor that lends itself to what Russia was really trying to achieve on September 24. Intimidation. That's been Russia's goal throughout September. It spent the month poking and prodding at both NATO and the European Union, or EU, with a heavy focus on aerial threats. The two GPS attacks on European ministers' aircraft that have already been covered are just part of what Russia has been doing. Russia has also been sending drones and aircraft into NATO-owned airspace. Poland grabbed all of the headlines on September 10, when it reported that at least 19 Russian drones entered its airspace. Those drones weren't carrying warheads, it was later discovered, but Poland still felt the need to shoot 3 of them down because it couldn't have known that at the time. Russia was trying to intimidate Poland. It pulled the same kind of trick in Estonian airspace a few days later, only it used fighter jets instead of drones. This time, a trio of MiG-31s violated Estonia's airspace, prompting a response from NATO jets that were required to guide the Russian jets away. This was no accident. Estonia attempted to communicate with the Russian jets' pilots, only to receive no response. Again, Russia was poking the NATO bear, seeing what it could get away with while sending the message that its aerial assets are an ever-present threat. Both of these incidents caused the affected countries to trigger NATO's Article 4, which results in a consultation being held to discuss the next appropriate steps. NATO has also responded quickly by creating Operation Eastern Sentry, through which it will boost the aerial defences along Europe's eastern flank. However, the main point here is that what happened to Robles' jet isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of hybrid warfare that Russia has been leaning into heavily all month. Right now, the odds are high that there will soon be reporting on another such incident, as all part of Putin's attempt to scare, cajole, and threaten NATO's member nations. If Robles is to be believed, none of these threats is going to work, but Russia will make them anyway, if for no other reason than to cause disruption where there will otherwise be none. And that leads back to Kaliningrad. It's no coincidence that Robles' aircraft experienced GPS disruption over Kaliningrad. At this point, it appears that Russians' main use for the exclave is to conduct hybrid warfare exercises against NATO members, which makes Kaliningrad very dangerous. After all, the exclave has a much longer history with these sorts of hybrid warfare tactics than Russia's most recent spurt of September activity would suggest. Going all the way back to January 2024, Newsweek reported that the origins of a GPS disturbance in Finland, which was a brand new member of NATO at the time, likely came from Kaliningrad. Finland had been experiencing issues since December 15 of the previous year, including aircraft registering navigational errors over the Baltic Sea. Newsweek says that Marcus Johnson, who's an open source intelligence specialist, claimed to have traced the disturbances to Kaliningrad. In an ex-post, Johnson said, "By plotting an assumed max jamming range for each bad position, there is one area standing out, Kaliningrad." Johnson also shared a series of maps supporting the point. In May 2024, the BBC published an article in which it claimed that various GPS disruptions within the Black Sea, Baltic Sea, and the Mediterranean Sea were widely attributed to Russia. Kaliningrad isn't responsible for all of these attacks, though it is Russia's major Baltic Sea hub. The BBC noted that Finnish airline Finnair suspended flights to the Estonian city of Tartu for a month due to these GPS disturbances, a decision made because the Tartu airport relies entirely on GPS. Finnair Vice President Juho Sinkkonen said, "Pilots are reporting cases actively, and we get more than 100 reports per month." The same outlet also noted that former UK Defense Secretary Grant Shapps has also been a victim of Kaliningrad's GPS interference, when his RAF plane suffered the same kinds of problems that just affected Robles. Fast forward to July 2025, and Defense News again confirmed that all signs point to Russia when it comes to all of this GPS interference. Two hotspots continuously pop up: Kaliningrad, Russia's exclave wedged between Poland and Lithuania, and the St. Petersburg area. Both regions are known to have a heavy Russian military presence, including divisions specialized in electronic warfare and radio, the outlet reported. Again and again, Kaliningrad's name pops up. It's almost as though constant GPS jamming signals are coming out of the exclave, which lends credence to the Spanish Defense Ministry's claims that Robles may not have been targeted directly. Her plane just got too close to Kaliningrad. But even then, there is intention behind Russia's actions. A lot of NATO-aligned planes will fly close to that exclave to get to Poland or any of the Baltic states. Russia may be targeting everyone indiscriminately with its Kaliningrad jammers, but it knows for a fact that it's going to be capturing prominent European officials in its cyber net, because those officials visit nations that Russia is already targeting. Russia knows exactly what it's doing with Kaliningrad. The exclave now exists to destabilize. There are even secret bases built in the region that exist for that purpose. While all of the outlets just mentioned make fairly vague claims that jamming signals are confirmed to come out of Kaliningrad, TVP World says that a specific base has even been identified. In August, it reported that classified documents obtained by Estonia's Delfi News website indicate that much of the Kaliningrad jamming activity comes from a facility located in the small town of Piernesc. That site is apparently part of Russia's wider Tobol electronic warfare network, and it's capable of targeting not just GPS, but also Galileo, GLONASS, and even Elon Musk's Starlink network. The delegation of the European Union to Ukraine also highlights Kaliningrad as a problem. In July, that organization listed 9 individuals and 6 entities it claims are responsible for destabilizing activities in both Ukraine and the EU. Kaliningrad is high on that list. The delegation says that Russia has established the 841st Separate Electronic Warfare Center in the exclave, in addition to sending 2 high-ranking members of military staff to oversee that center's operation. As with many other outlets, it notes that Kaliningrad is responsible for GPS jamming and spoofing activity, with most of the exclave efforts focusing on the Baltic region. At this point, it feels fair to say that Kaliningrad lies at the heart of Russia's hybrid warfare strategy. At the very least, it's a major hub, which makes the exclave vital to the hybrid warfare problem Putin is trying to create in Europe. Russia keeps getting away with these sorts of attacks. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace explained why in a November 2024 article. It points out that Russia's hybrid warfare strategy poses such a massive problem to European nations because it takes place within a legal grey zone. What Russia is doing, including disrupting GPS on the Spanish Defense Minister's flight, lies below the threshold of armed conflict, the endowment says. This legal grey area makes it very difficult for Western governments, such as those belonging to NATO, to respond with much more than condemnation and threats of action. Those governments have legal frameworks. They're wary of escalation, which means it's never as simple as deciding to attack Russia in response to its hybrid warfare tactics. The whole point of these tactics is to provide Russia with plausible deniability. Russia takes advantage of that fact every time news like this breaks. The country hasn't commented on Robles' flight yet, but as Reuters points out in its report on the incident, Russia has denied interfering with satellite and communication networks many times in the past. It's obvious to anybody paying attention that Russia, and particularly Kaliningrad, is behind all of this. However, Russia will always say it isn't involved because it knows that there is no real response coming. It's all about disruption, intimidation, and as long as Kaliningrad stands, it will be ground zero for these sorts of hybrid warfare tactics for many months, perhaps even years to come. What's more, Kaliningrad may end up serving a very important purpose in what Putin is cooking up for after the Ukraine war. Russia's leader assumes he's going to win that war, and if he does, he's going to set his sights even further than Ukraine. Intelligence has revealed that Russia is preparing for war with NATO. Want to see the proof? Then watch our video covering what's been revealed about Russia's plan. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to subscribe to the Military Show for more coverage of the simmering tensions between Russia and NATO.